Hello there, and welcome to this week's edition of the chat. He's Ralph the Legend, or I don't know which way around it comes out, but he's Ralph the Legend. I'm Peter. We're going to be talking about two things this week. Actually, no, I'm going to say this is probably going to be the hardest podcast because of the subject matter that we're going to talk about this week. But I think that it really, we do need to talk about it. So the first thing, we are going to talk about what is happening in Israel and Gaza. And secondly, maybe less controversially, we're going to be talking about takeaways from the Labour conference. And I don't mean what they ordered on ordered in takeaways on whatever. Anyway. Right. So anyway, I just can't remember. Right. So let's start first of all. So what's happening in Israel and Gaza now? The way that I've talked about it this week, I've tried to be, to concentrate on the commercial aspects of it, because that's what, Watson's Daily is all about. Watson's Daily is not a massive news machine or anything like that. The whole idea is to try to just, showcase the news that is going on in the world that has a lot of impact, and try to work out the importance of that news and how that applies in various regions and industries and all that kind of thing. So I suppose that this is a very difficult subject to broach, because feelings are running very high, but more than that, obviously the human cost of all this is huge. It is terrible. And it will get worse. Unfortunately, this is the way it is. Now, to sort of try to encapsulate what I think about this, it does feel like what happened in Northern Ireland, an island, but on a much bigger scale. However, the reason why I feel that there are similarities between the two is because it really felt with Ireland and Northern Ireland that it would never end, because there was so much history. Civilians had died and soldiers had died, split families. It was, it went on for many years. And, so my point is that the way that was resolved in the end was that one side had to stop and say, look, you want this, we want this. We have not been able to come to any agreement because of the history of what has gone on until now. We cannot forgive all the murders and the suffering that all this has caused. However, they said, in order to stop this from continuing, we need to do something now, and we need to be able to move forward and try to, whilst not pretending that nothing has happened, we need to acknowledge what our differences are, what we want to achieve, and we need to work towards that, rather than, and we have to acknowledge, but we have to work through what has happened in the past. Now, I would imagine that if you were a soldier or anyone really who'd been affected by the IRA in the 70s and 80s and things, it would be enormously difficult to shake the hand of, say, Gerry Adams or Martin McGuinness, who was seen by many to be the architect of a lot of killing. Now, but in the name of trying to make a better future, both sides tried to work together. From what I can see, what is going on now in Israel and Gaza, if people continue down the road that they are already going down, there will be no resolution to this, and the situation will continue to get worse, and unfortunately, it's the people that suffer. So, from that perspective, we could. The thing is, we wanted to really talk about this because the thing is, we could, it sounds very flippant to talk about such serious goings on, and then say, well, the oil price is going up and defense companies are doing really well, which I have to say I have said, but and then say, and then the end result of that is that my petrol is more expensive, is so tiny compared to the enormity of the tragedy that is going on and the murdering and everything that's going on at the moment. But equally, I think that it's important that we just do have a bit of a chat about that, because I know there are a lot of people out there, and I would include myself in this as well, that haven't really thought about it consistently over a long period of time. And suddenly this happens and you think, oh, what's going on? Why is this happening? So anyway, what are your thoughts on this, Ralph?
Yes, indeed, and an excessively hard, difficult subject to broach, not just because currently we see yet another source of cost of human lives in the world, pretty much on our doorstep, but also because of the high complexity of the conflict which has played out in the region, well, certainly since the Second World War, but the roots of which, of course, go further back still. It is, however, sort of forced upon us, so to speak. Yes, as you said, we are basically a business forecast. We talk about a business podcast. We talk about business. We talk about the economy. And yet, there are sometimes emotionally and ethically difficult frameworks which we cannot ignore and which we need to certainly address, which lead to comparatively hollow sounding subjects such as oil prices and inflation. However, we have talked about these things in the context of the Ukraine war, which arguably was a very, one would argue, economically possibly more incisive event than this perhaps will turn out to be. And this we discussed it then, and we need to discuss it now. You have basically already pointed this out. The oil price has risen. Certain companies will certainly benefit from it. It will support inflation for longer, but these are basically the hollow takeaways from this conflict, and let us focus on the conflict a little bit more, I would suggest, which is, of course, what you just did. Now, I'm not going to talk about the ethics here, simply because it is not for me. It is not my purview. I am neither Palestinian nor have I ever lived in Israel. I have no standing in this debate, and I do not understand from first principles, so to speak, from my own experience of what it feels like to be Palestinian or Jewish. What I would therefore simply say is to retrace some of the roots of the conflict. And we all know that clearly after the Second World War, Israel was founded as a state. Land was basically taken from the surrounding Arab states, and the State of Israel was founded. In the Balfour Agreement of 1948, I believe it says explicitly that this is not to the prejudice of any non-Jewish Palestinians who live in the region. I think it said something to that effect, but the Balfour Agreement never went beyond that and made it more concrete than that, and specifically it never went towards an establishment of a Palestinian state. And that is, of course, the root of the issue. Well, I say of course, I believe it may be the root of the issue. I think most armed conflicts are fought over territory, much more than they are fought over ideologically or religious differences. Now, it is clear that those differences are sort of inextricably linked with territory. If you think about it, there is a people who believe in something and they live somewhere. And so there is clearly the territory and the religion, the ideology, the philosophy of the people who live there are intertwined. But I would think that the root of the conflict in the region lies in the fact that the Palestinians never had the privilege of living in a territory which they can call their own. What they have instead, unfortunately, is a disconnected territory within Israel, which is the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. And again, now I have to be careful. I can only narrate and repeat what I read in the press. I cannot fact check it because I've never been to the Gaza Strip. But it would appear that Israel controls the utilities which go into the Gaza Strip, electricity and water. The press informs me that the living conditions which Israel perhaps allows to prevail in these territories are precarious indeed and have over time fed into the already existing unrest of people there, unrest born from the fact that they have no territory to call their own. This has ignited in the past, in the Yom Kippur War, and this has ignited now in the incursions which we're seeing. What might be the solution? I'm shaking my head, and this is not surprising that I do, because if there was an easy answer to this succinct question, the solution would already have been implemented. I think I would echo what you say. In the end, and I apologize for this. It is going to sound trite because everybody knows what I'm going to say. But in the end, what we need is one side to see the justified demands of the other side to live a life which is self-controlled and where your identity of a people is honored. That, I believe, can only be brought about in the end by more shared experiences between Israel, between the Jewish community and the Palestinian community on the other side. So maybe shared institutions of education to the extent that this is possible, shared villages, shared dwelling areas, and perhaps leading to the establishment of some sort or semblance of a federal country where both peoples live in harmony but self-determination, voting for a shared elected government. Now, everybody who's listening to me will now basically say, Ralph, you live in Cloud Cuckoo Land. And I realize this. This is a solution which I think might perhaps work, but it will only work if the two sides will be able to come together. We have seen many rapprochements over the last 20 years, over the last 40 years. None of them have resulted in lasting peace in the region. But your point, of course, is valid. And we have we have sort of non-Middle Eastern privilege in saying this, because we don't live there. We are not affected by it. It is easy for me to sit here and state the obvious. Yes, I'm sure the Jewish community and the Palestinian community would both say, yes, Ralph, of course, this is a solution. Well done for pointing this out. But guess what? And so I don't know where the answer is. I would just hope that the current hostilities can come to an end, perhaps more quickly with less bloodshed than we are all expecting. And one would hope that perhaps the tragedy which is currently playing itself out may bring the parties to a table and just sit down and rationally say, guys, this has gone on for 70, 80 years now. It serves nobody to do this. And we have to come to some form of solution of a shared nature where people share experiences and as a consequence stop vilifying the other side. And that will be extremely hard to do at first, but if we don't try, then it will never be done, and the bloodshed will continue. And if there's no bloodshed, in the absence of bloodshed, there is no peace. Both the Jewish community in Israel lives in constant expectation of military incursions. The Palestinian people live in living conditions which are unacceptable. And so in the end, nobody has a life which where they can say we have our destiny under our own control.
So there we go. I mean, yeah. Anyway, it's an extraordinarily difficult. It's extraordinarily difficult subject matter. I think that we both wanted to address it because I guess, I've kind of danced around it, I guess, this week. I suppose, a lot of it is to do with the fact that right at the beginning of something like this, there is a lot of news flow. There's a lot of noise, to be honest. There's a lot of incorrect things being said and done and highlighted. And actually, we've seen in fact, platforms like X, or formerly Twitter, being key in spreading misinformation. So, yeah, I mean, we both wanted to talk about this. It's obviously a very difficult ongoing situation. We will probably revisit it again in the future. But the only thing, I guess remaining is to hope that there is a solution. And that, but I don't think it's going to happen anytime soon. Because I think that the Israelis in particular, or Benjamin Netanyahu, will very much want to show the Israelis who voted him into power on the back of, sort of security and all that kind of thing. He's going to want to show that he's the man. And as long as that goes on, then it ain't going to stop.
We will have to see what happens. I would not be surprised if Israel responds with extreme force in the next few weeks. But whether they do or whether they do not do this, the attack of Hamas has already thrown a spanner in the works into the fledgling start of a rapprochement between Saudi Arabia and Israel. I think the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia has recently said that a recognition of Israel was plausible. That in itself is an incredible breakthrough. The Saudi Arabia has refused to even acknowledge that Israel exists since the Second World War. And now, of course, that is going to be at least put on the back burner, and the current hostilities, which are far from over, which we have unfortunately, I believe, not seen the height of, will certainly, let's be most positive, make further progress more difficult.
Yeah,
that's a very optimistic way of saying this. Unfortunately, it may well have meant that the progress which we have seen over the last few years might be scuppered, and we are going back to the drawing board, and the peace progress, such as it was, might have been pulled back for several years.
Okay then, right. So after that, let us talk about the second topic conversation for this week. So this is about takeaways from the Labour conference. Now, we have talked recently about takeaways from the Conservative Party conference. I would say that this week I've purposely not really said that much about what's come out from the Labour conference, and the reason is because it's not because I'm giving Conservatives more airtime and Labour less. It's because the Conservatives are in government, and so what they say in the conference might actually come about. Whereas a Labour conference, because they're not in power, they can say whatever the hell they want, and it may or may not come true because they're not in power. So having said that, so that's why I've not done it, because also there's been so much more stuff going on this week that I felt that that other stuff took precedence. However, I think that it is definitely worth talking about this, because we have to understand what Labour may do should they come to power when the election occurs next year, and to get an idea of where they stand, what they stand for, where are they on key policy areas, and in a way, if we know that, we can perhaps work out what the response from the government might be. For instance, they may adopt some of these policies in a way to take the edge off Labour. They may decide to go completely against those those policies in order to try to build more of a difference and more of a divide between the two parties. But what do you think, Ralph?
That last point is actually interesting. They might steal the thunder, basically, and perhaps that is a reason why a party in opposition may, in the current situation where, frankly, it is their election to lose. So a party in that particular position, which is preparing for government, or possibility of government, might wish to be a little bit more cagey about the policies as formulated at a conference, which may be 6 months, 8, 10 months, before the next general election. But then, of course, the Tories had their conference, and now it is for Labour to talk, so to speak. And well, last time when we discussed the Tory conference, I was underwhelmed, you were whelmed, and on average we were subwhelmed, which is the new word which we coined. Yes. On this one, I think I was whelmed, actually.
Whelmed. High praise indeed.
Yes, it is actually. Pretty good. I was whelmed, and I was expecting to be underwhelmed, but I was actually whelmed. Right. Why was I whelmed? Well, it's not because some dude came and put glitter on Mr. Starmer to make it into a more sparkling speech. Which is probably also the only way in which Mr. Starmer's speeches can be made more sparkling. The man is not a scintillating orator. But then, of course, I have to say, sorry, this is a personal statement. Sorry, guys, don't mean to say anything too much, but we've seen orators with charisma in the past in our government, and we know who they are, and they haven't really produced much. So I take an honourable man or woman who has got policies which, in their view, will make the UK a better place to live, over the charismatic orator who perhaps is just in it for himself. talking about Labour, what I thought was interesting were two things. I thought that Rachel Reeves, who is currently the shadow Chancellor of Exchequer person, shone in the event, because she made it clear that Labour is open for business, so to speak, and that Labour is a business party, a party of business. She said at a previous event, not this time at the conference, but at the previous event, she very explicitly and decidedly said that Labour is not going to introduce wealth taxes. That's an important thing. I mean, specifically talking about mansion taxes. And that's an important thing because a wealth tax is a bit like a poll tax. A poll tax is a mansion tax. You have to pay it whether you have the money or not, so to speak. And a lot of people will have houses which are in the southeast. Maybe they're inherited, but they have certain valuations. And if you then have to pay a tax on the value of your house every year, then you basically have to pay actual cash, reducing your discretionary income on an unrealized gain on the value of your house, which you can't do anything with. That would be unfair for anybody, and you don't have to be wealthy to live in a house where such a mansion tax would be a painful reduction, would result in a painful reduction in your discretionary income. So Labour has come out and said, we're not going to do a mansion tax, we're not going to do wealth taxes. That's an important point. Second, what they have said, and they have said this at this conference, they are not going to harmonize income tax and capital gains tax. And that is important because of foreign investment. I mean, if you wish to be a foreign investor in this country, be it in the equity markets or through private equity, you do not want to see that capital gains tax and therefore your return on your investment is going to go down. Capital gains tax is going to go up, and therefore the return on your investment is potentially coming down. If you were afraid that that might happen in the next government, that would be a disincentive to invest in the UK as a marketplace, and it would therefore arguably be negative for the potential growth of the economy. Which brings me to growth, because this is what Rachel Reeves said. Actually, no, I forgot what she said verbatim, but she said something like, we don't want to tax the rich and come out with public spending. We want to fairly tax and fairly grow, or something like that. So it's a more moderate approach to this. They do not want to increase taxes, but they want to foster growth through other means. One means I have already mentioned, which is that they are not going to lower the incentive of the UK as a marketplace, as a place to do investment, by increasing capital gains tax. And the other way in which they said they wish to benefit the UK as a place to do business is through something which is going to come over a little bit arcane. I apologize. This is going to be a key point, but it's going to be sounding excessively boring. And they said that they are going to increase the powers of the OBR. Now, the OBR is the Office for Budget Responsibility, and I'm going to have to snap my fingers, I think, at this stage to wake everybody up again. Hello?
Yeah.
Still with me?
Yeah.
So it's the Office of Budget Responsibility. We know what happens when you ignore the Office of Budget Responsibility, because that is what Liz Truss did. And Liz Truss, as we remember, she may only have been in government for 45 days or whatever it was, but she managed to crater the UK economy single-handedly because of her actions, which resulted precisely in the conviction or the suspicion that the UK was not a place where you can invest. Now, what Labour is hoping to do, or is pledging basically to do, is to say that we are going to have one tax event per year. That tax event is going to be in the budget, in the annual budget. So pick one of them. In the November budget, that is going to be where the tax event is. And that's not going to be repealed or altered or modified in the spring budget. This is important because if you are a business, you really don't want uncertainty. You cannot plan in the long run if you have reason to believe that the tax environment in which you are now, where you created your corporate budget, is going to be altered in 6 months' time from now. And this is what the Tory party unfortunately has done in the last several years. It's got a patchwork of patches here and patches there, and that created an environment of lack of stability for business. And indeed, one of the buzzwords at the Labour conference was stability. And so in connection with what I said about the OBR, Rachel Reeves said that this is going to create stability for business going forward. And these are important takeaways. For me, these are the two key takeaways, because to me they demonstrate that Labour is very keen in demonstrating that they are not old Labour. They are not a party who, if they are voted into power, is going to reintroduce the sort of dated socialism of the 1970s, where you lower taxes for the working class and the middle class, you tax the rich, you nationalize industries, and you basically choke off growth. And that, I think, is the key message here. And I believe that went down very well with business. If you listen to some of the statements which business leaders have made following the Labour conference, I believe that was the right note to send. And and then there were some other things. There was the announcement that they would build 1.5 million new homes, new housing. That seems to be a very ambitious target, because it translates into something like 300,000 new homes per year, when at no point in the history of the UK more than 250,000, I think, were built. And that's the peak. So the average was sort of 200,000. So it's an ambitious announcement. It is a necessary announcement because housing is an issue. But it is an ambitious announcement, and it is easy to make, to your point, when you are in the opposition.
Yeah.
And the final one is they're going to create a national wealth fund, funded with £8 billion initially, which is going to invest in key industries in the UK. These two things are interesting. We will have to see how they develop. These are my, whatever many there were, I think 4. These are my 4 key takeaways. But the most important things for me were the two surrounding the business philosophy of Labour, and that's the reason why I'm whelmed.
Amazing. I mean, like you say, I mean, the fact that you are whelmed is, I'd say, a ringing endorsement of the conference. But yeah, I mean, I think that it's definitely important to take this into account. Of course, we have a long time before we have a year. Many things can change in that time. I mean, a scenario I can quite easily see happening is that the UK continues to confound the negative or pessimistic forecasts of bodies like the IMF, like the OECD. And maybe there could be growth potentially next year. I mean, we have just avoided recession again, by a very small margin again. But I can see going into next year, there could be some euphoria in the sense of Sunak coming into the home straight and deciding to invest, throw out the freebies, all that kind of stuff, to try to tempt the voters. But there may well be more uncertainty, and therefore the economy could be in limbo, maybe for the final quarter of of next year in particular, because no one knows who's going to win. So that's what I could foresee. I don't know. I mean, obviously, we have to wait a little bit of time before that, but yeah, I mean, I think that, but this is a shot over the bows, as they say. And it will be interesting to see how and if the Conservative government responds.
Yes. Yes, indeed. I still think, given what the Conservatives have done with and to this country over the last several years, it is Labour's election to lose.
Absolutely. And I think that's what the polls would suggest that as well, wouldn't they? And
yeah.
I don't mean people from Poland. I mean the opinion polls. Yeah,
I thought
just to clarify, yeah.
And I do think that this is even especially in this context, because Labour, of course, knows this full well, and from that point of view, I also think the Labour conference was a good PR exercise. I don't think they need to be criticized for not having the policies here and the implementation plan for the policies, because quite frankly, it's too early to do this. And your point is an interesting one. You might well lay yourself open to the risk that the Tory party might steal your thunder. I mean, who knows? But so far, I think they have done a good job in positioning themselves. The wasteland of Jeremy Corbyn is over and has been combated, I think. The risks which I see, I still that the Jeremy Corbyn days have shown that there are some quite unsavory tendencies in the Labour Party in the form of anti-Semitism. And that has been explicitly and vociferously stamped out. We will have to see how much of that prevails, but I don't believe this is going to be a tangible issue. The more important risk which I see is that Labour may not be as firm against trade union demands for wage increases as perhaps, well, there's no perhaps about it, as the Tory party has been. And why this is not in itself positive, we wish, of course, for wage increases and salary increases to be possible, but only if they reflect an increase in economic productivity. If we have inflation rising, inflation being curbed now because of interest rate rises, then there is a risk that just at a time when we finally can start to bring in interest rates down, Labour might be instrumental in allowing wage increases, therefore reigniting inflation and creating a situation where we will have to put up with higher interest rates for even longer than we will need to put up with them anyway. So that is a slight economic risk at the back of my mind, which is why I'm listening intently to specifically the statements which Labour makes with respect to the economy and to environments for industry and business in the UK.
Indeed. Well, thank you very much indeed. I mean, very interesting chat today. Lots of difficult issues. But anyway, I hope that you as listeners or watchers of this will have food for thought there. I would say we'll be back next week. Can't do next week, I'm afraid, because I'm away. But we will be back.
When are you ever here? I'm going to be here.
Good. Yeah. No, I mean, I no, just nothing spectacular for me. Seeing relatives. So yeah. But,
Cool.
but anyway, thank you very much indeed.
Final question.
Yeah.
Your point on Labour conference: whelmed, under, over?
I'd say non-whelmed.
Oh, God.
Just because I haven't really followed it that much, to be honest. But
that's terrible. That's just basically
I'm
like abstaining,
unwhelmed.
isn't it? That's
unwhelmed.
unwhelmed. Oh, fantastic! Perfect.
So,
I don't know what the average is between unwhelmed and whelmed.
It's tricky. Maybe we should write some sort of formula to, you know.
I think it's probably whelmed. If unwhelmed is you didn't really follow it, so you don't have an opinion, so that's zero.
Yeah, that's it.
0
yeah,
plus
neutral,
whelmed
yeah.
divided by 2 is basically. Oh no,
Yeah,
that's 1/2 whelmed now.
Yeah.
Okay, I think we stop here.
Yeah, I think that's probably best.
Yeah.
Probably
Okay.
best.
Cool.
Anyway,
Lovely.
Thank you very much indeed, as always.
Thanks, guys, for listening.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye.